Film is an art form. Growing up in South America, we always considered cinema the seventh art. And I grew up looking at it like you would a beautiful painting or a photograph or read a book. For me, cinema is a language and it's an art form. And that's the way that I teach it as well.
I consider film really anything where people are bringing together, image, sound, performance, even if the performance is not fictional, even if the performance is a factual, realistic performance. It's really an amalgamation of a bunch of different art forms. So when you get all of those things working together, I think that's film.
I think that, because I'm more of an editor, so as an editor, I think my definition of film is being able to take footage that other people have done, take a script, take anything, just this raw material, and turn it into a story. To me, that's what film is. You're taking all these different elements from sound, from the script writing, to just the director and the shots and the actors, and you're putting it into a story. You're making a story as an editor to create this film, to create a story. So to me, that's what film is, more or less. There's so many elements that go into it, and you're going to ask so many different people what is film, and they're all going to give you a different thing, because it all depends on their perspective of it. You ask a director what a film is, they're going to say, oh, it's what I make, it's what I tell people to do, kind of thing. That's like a really harsh way, don't quote that. You ask an actor what is a film, they're going to give you a completely different answer because they're the ones in the film. So as an editor, to me, it's taking all of that raw material that other people have created and making a story out of it, because that's what your job as an editor to do, is to take all that raw material from the sound, from the shots, from the actors, finding the best shots that actor did, all that stuff, which is very time consuming, and creating a story. To me, that's what film is.
How do I define film? Film for me has been a way to express myself, because sometimes I can't verbalize exactly what I want. And that's why I got into acting, is because I could take somebody else's words and kind of imbue my own feelings and thoughts behind them. And so I think film is a way to connect with other people when you don't have the ability to necessarily do it in person all the time. And it's a way of connecting to a larger group of people versus, just somebody across from you. Granted, that's important, but for me, film has a social aspect to it, and the fact that it's all manipulation, but you can hopefully teach people about a certain topic or a certain thing, or about feelings and how people experience things. And so for me, film has been a way to express what people don't know and to teach them things that they haven't seen themselves.
Well, I think, these days, film, video, media, all of those words are similar, and some people use them interchangeably, and sometimes that's okay. But it's, I even find it challenging sometimes when I'm talking about moving pictures to, which word do you use to be the most accurate? Is it a film? Was it made with film? Or is it a video? Was it made with video? Or is it called a film because it's a feature, but it was really shot with video, So basically, I think it's moving images that tell a story of some kind or give information of some kind.
There is absolutely no difference between a man and a woman behind the camera, and it doesn't make you better or worse a storyteller. It doesn't really matter. I think it's the artist's responsibility to challenge values, and artists have the liberty of telling stories the way that they see the world, or doesn't matter how twisted it may be or how romantic and nostalgic it may be. It is just the opportunity of an artist, to challenge the audience. And it does not matter the gender. I think male and female are the same.
There is no difference between a man and a woman behind the camera, except for how they are perceived by their crew, the cast, or their subjects in the documentary. And that, unfortunately, I think is the biggest detriment for women, which is still today perceptions are women aren't as able to, be talented directors or cinematographers.
The difference between a man and a woman behind the camera, I'm not one to really see much of a difference. I definitely think they do each have their own kind of story. Like, me behind the camera is going to be completely different than a man behind the camera, but I'm also different than anybody behind the camera. So you could be behind the camera like you are now, or I could be standing where you are, and we would kind of be getting completely different things. And that's kind of, I'm going to go into a book here that I read. I had a book that I read recently, and what is it called? It's called In the Blink of an Eye, I think. And it talks about how a lot of times film is like the DNA difference between humans and chimps, which is a really weird analogy to look at, but it's really true. Because you have a man, a woman, any man or woman, and they're taking what they're doing, whether it's being behind the camera, whether it's editing, whether it's doing sound. You can be given the same material, you can be given the same opportunities, and you're going to produce a different thing. And it's just the way how DNA is with humans and chimps. You actually start off looking almost exactly the same when you're like conceived, but by the time you're born, you're two completely different things. So you start off the same, and you end up different. And I think no matter who's behind the camera, that's what it's gonna be. But it definitely, it's very different when you look at any kind of Hollywood film that's made, whether it's made by a woman or a man, because they're gonna have completely different perspectives. Especially now when you look at the film industry, where there is a lot more women in film, and there's a lot more women directors and women behind the cameras. There's a lot more of like that feminine power coming through and stuff, whether it's from TV shows or movies. So I personally am not going to see a difference in it, but you are definitely going to be able to see a difference as you're watching film progress through the years and how it has progressed through the years, since women have become more powerful in the media.
I don't think so. When I went back to, it never occurred to me to try to be a director until very recently, and I was trying to think about why, actually as part of my application to grad school. I was like, why is that? Why did it never cross my mind? And I think I always found cameras kind of intimidating, and I was thinking about the vocabulary we use around cameras. We talk about capturing, cutting, shooting, putting things in the can. It has this feel of like hunting, that the story is sort of out in the savannah, and we go out with a gun and we shoot it and we club it to death and we drag it back to the editing suite, which it's just, some of the language around it is very male, is very macho. And in fact, when you look at some of the advertising for cameras, it's very male and very macho and very warrior-like. Sets are sort of run as like little military operations with, the director as some sort of general. And so I think I was always sort of intimidated by it because it just struck me as not feminine. And not that I have a problem with that, but it just felt, it felt intimidating to me and not something I was particularly comfortable with. And in contrast, writing is very patient. It's quiet. You have a blank page. There's nobody else around. There's no other voices in the room when you write. The blank page is sort of an open door, right? It's an endless sea. So I think it took me a while to realize that vocabulary was, gendered for a reason, and that maybe there was another way to think about directing, and instead of thinking of, I sort of wrote this in my essay when I applied to grad school, that maybe instead of thinking of a camera as a weapon that you shoot things with, maybe it's better to think of a camera as a door that you open, and that if you open it and if you sort of structure your shooting environment in such a way the story can sort of walk through that door and be set free. And as soon as I started thinking about it like that, it became much less intimidating to me. And there was this vision of directing I had where it was a more familiar experience, and that directing could live on a ground that I was more comfortable with, something that was sort of coaxed and nurtured and encouraged, and it was about building a safe space in which all this stuff could happen. And it was sort of amazing how revolutionary that just shift in thinking about it became, and suddenly it was like, oh, I can do that. I'm comfortable with that. That's not a problem. And so I guess that it was sort of a flip of thinking about the role of the camera and the role of the director. in a story. And honestly, just thinking about the vocabulary around it and the sort of metaphors that were used to talk about it that suddenly made me feel a lot more comfortable with it. Yeah, and so since then I've not found them nearly so intimidating as I used to.
What's the difference between a man and a woman behind a camera? I don't think there is a difference. I mean, that's a hard one to say, because then it's also you're compartmentalizing two different types of people when we're all the same. I think the differences are going to come from experience and backgrounds. I don't think it's necessarily gender, but gender does come into that because women experience things in a different way than men do. I've had some really shitty male directors when I was acting, because the experiences I had, they were unable to speak with people. I think women will take in the situation a bit more than men do. A lot of men I've worked with kind of react in the moment versus kind of taking a step back and kind of surveying the situation and then responding to it. Granted, that can also just be personality, you know. Some men that go into filmmaking have a particular personality. They've been built up, whereas women don't get built up like men do. You know, I think women may have not as much confidence going into the field because it's not viewed as, you know, something that women should do, even today, which is weird.
Yeah, men and women behind the camera. This is something I think about a lot. And of course, for most of us, we're overwhelmingly exposed to visual images that are presented by a man being behind the camera. So of course, that's our baseline of normalcy, whereas women behind the camera as directors or cinematographers are statistically much more rare even now. But certainly the films that we were formed on were predominantly made by men with masculine frame of reference. And I think it's intriguing to think about how we have just decided that whatever we see on film is somehow normal and neutral. And it's nice to be in an era when people are thinking more intentionally about not only do women behind the camera make films that have a particular vision because they're being made by women, but if that is true, or to the extent that's true, could we not also say that the movies we've been accepting for all these years as just some sort of generic vision are fundamentally colored by the fact that they're made by men, mostly white men, and try to be more aware of the kinds of assumptions that are embedded in those films that have shaped our whole consciousness.
Personally, I don't think of filmmakers being better or worse than each other based on gender or race or any other thing. I think each filmmaker is, has different skills and have different perspectives and have different backgrounds, and they all bring different things to the table when they're working on a film, regardless of their gender. And so I think it's really hard for me to say that one is better than the other.
So I can tell you because I've been here over 20 years in Chicago, I have seen more females involved in film production. I remember one of the kind of silly jokes about production is that every time that you would see, a female on the set, it would be either an actor or the script girl, or somebody's assistant. That's pretty much it. So all of that has changed dramatically. Of course, there's a long history about that being true, but I think in the last 10 years, I can easily say, even involved in production as an instructor, that I have seen more female students, more students of any minority that are interested in being involved. They just feel more confident, and they have also a big voice that they want to share and tell their stories from their point of view.
I think the film industry often makes you feel like things are getting better, and that there is progress, because we are starting to celebrate more women and people of color in film. But I actually think if you take a look at the numbers, it's very depressing. So I vacillate in how I feel about it. Some days I'm so encouraged. I'm like, you know, look at all of these, you know, look at Shonda Rhimes, and look at, you know, Key and Peele and Amy Schumer, and all these wonderful people who are, you know, talking about race, and or who are just simply making the films they want to make. And look what happened with Moonlight. But that's a surprising minority, and I think they really get lifted up and heralded because they're so different, and because people are so excited, and because the industry is starting to become aware of its diversity issue, both with race and gender. And so they really prop up these few media makers that are women and people of color. But, you know, when you get down to brass tacks, there's an FBI investigation of Hollywood because they have so few women in the industry. And if you just stumble upon any set, I would guarantee 90% of the crew is white men. And I would guarantee most of the people in front of the camera are white men. So, you know, we have a long, long way to go, but we do have to keep celebrating these few people that kind of squeak through and manage to infiltrate the system.
So women's involvement in the media now, film, radio, all that stuff, I would say there's definitely a lot more women, especially looking at my grad school class too. We actually have a class that's made up 90% of women. And I know my professors are actually kind of shocked about that too sometimes. Like, we have so many women in here, and there's like the men are the minority for once in a film class, which is crazy. I don't think it's ever anything technical wise, because women with technical stuff I think can actually be better in the long run. Women pay more attention to detail than men do, that kind of thing, at least in my opinion. In my opinion, I think that. I could totally just be wrong. People are like, that's wrong, that's no. But I think women do have a good eye for catching things like with emotions wise and stuff like that, so they can actually figure out like what's the best shot. And I do think women are definitely more involved in the media nowadays, and I kind of answered that in the question before, that you can definitely see now in films, women are a lot more empowered. There's a lot of films with women protagonists, a lot of strong female leads, like anything from like The Hunger Games, that has a strong female lead. Harry Potter even has a strong female lead in it. Beauty and the Beast, the one that just came out, Belle is a very strong female lead, and even in that film, the lead, Emma Watson, she was like, well, if we're taking this out, we're gonna make my character stronger. She's actually the inventor in the new Beauty and the Beast film, because that's what Emma Watson wanted to do, because she's such a powerful figure for women's rights these days. So I definitely would say that women are a lot more in the media now, but I don't think it's anything to do with technical wise. I don't think it's anything to do with it's harder for women to learn this stuff than men. I think it's more women for so long were encouraged not to do it. And you can even look back on like when we were still doing editing with like cutting strips. A lot of that was females doing it. A lot of it was women editing. But back then, editing wasn't something people really thought of when they looked at film. They didn't think of someone sitting there and doing the precision work of cutting the film. And it was women that were doing that because it was something that took such a precise hand. So people don't realize that, but that's exactly what was going on. So women have always had a huge play in film. It's just becoming more relevant now and becoming more seen now because of the times we're in, where it's a lot of feminism, female power, as well as the fact that men aren't saying we can't do it anymore. So
when I started out, there were some women. I mean, there were 2 women directors at the television station I worked at. But there was also pay issues because as I moved up, I wasn't getting paid the same as other men. Has that changed? I don't think it's necessarily changed all that much, unfortunately, and that was over 20 years ago. There are more women, I think, in the post side, especially motion graphics. There's a lot of women in motion graphics. In editorial, I haven't seen a lot of women, which I find strange. I don't think it's necessarily not understanding technical things. I mean, I've certainly met a lot of people in their 20s who hate technical and don't understand computers, but they're men and women. It's not, one gender over the other. I love the technical side. A lot of people don't. I think that might put off some people. Although, you know, it's hard getting into film sometimes because people think I'm going to become a big director, you know, but they don't understand there's a lot of technicality that goes into it. It's not just telling a story. So why women don't get into it, I think that comes down to education. They don't see a lot of women in the field. You go to the Oscars and all the directors are men, you know, and that's kind of the same thing with editorial. If you don't see your representation of yourself, you're not going to think that's something for you, or I can do this. So I don't think it's probably gotten a little bit better with a lot of more women in the field, but I don't think it's changed all that much.
Well, clearly more women are getting involved. Now, when I hear women who are working in Hollywood talk about the industry, there's still some complaints about access, and it's hard to know what's driving some of those things, because I do think Hollywood anyway, or commercial film production, is driven by the profit motive, of course. And so I think if there were a sense that if women made movies that someone could make a bundle off of them, that the economics would drive a big change in the industry. So it's sort of interesting supply-demand problem. I heard an interesting anecdote from one woman who teaches film, saying that when she started teaching film 15 years ago, there were almost no women in her classes, and now her classes are more than half female. So I think, at least in terms of people who are getting training, there's more of a balance coming along, although it's probably the case that still many of the sub-disciplines are going to be predominantly male for the foreseeable future, and that might be things like sound engineering or post-production. I mean, editing, it's interesting to think that there have been many distinguished female film editors for decades and decades, and that's been one area of filmmaking that seems to have offered a lot of opportunity for women. And I've heard interesting theories about why that may be the case. It's not an extremely interactive kind of work. You know, you're in a room, in a dark room, maybe consulting with the director or producers or whatever, but you're not having to deal with the dynamic on set, which is very chain of command, hierarchy kind of province, where you're dealing with more this team issue of who gets attention, who's allowed to give orders, and how do people feel about being given those orders, depending on who the orders are coming from.
I think that maybe back in the day, or I don't know. Females have always been working in the film industry from the beginning of time, from the beginning of film. They've always been involved. I think it's gotten better over time, and more women have been included in that, and many more women are pursuing that, pursuing filmmaking. And I think that women they're being given more opportunities to be in the creative role of a filmmaker, and not just a producer, you know, not just a money maker, a fundraiser, or something like that, which I think is, you know, kind of the more of a traditional role that women have played in the arts in general, is administrative roles. I think that there's still room for growth, and that women can do more, and I hope that women do more, and I hope that there are more technical, I hope that as, you know, technology changes and the industry changes and starts to be more inclusive with, you know, all kinds of people, that you know, women aren't afraid of taking on technology and technical skills to pursue filmmaking.
I definitely feel like a lot of doors are closed for women, and they have a long way to go. I think it's very easy to be a woman in film and get discouraged very, very quickly. The problem is it's also very subtle how women get shut out, but there is more information about this. So for example, I love comedy. Comedy is the genre that I'm interested in writing and directing and all of that. And there was an article that came out about how female-led comedies from women like Tina Fey and Amy Poehler and so forth tend to get far more harshly reviewed than similar male-led comedies, you know, by Vince Vaughn and all of those, and Will Ferrell and so forth. And when these female-directed, written, led films get harsher reviews, they do worse at the box office. You know, then it makes it harder for other films that are similar to get funded, so people are a little more nervous to back a female-led film, and it's just like a vicious cycle. And, you know, as much as I love comedy, let's be honest, most comedies are kind of terrible. I mean, they're great, but they're terrible, right? And so you take a Will Ferrell movie, and it's not that great, but you love it, and it's funny and silly and stupid. And the same could be said for a Tina Fey and Amy Poehler movie, but they're somehow held to a different standard. And that's just one example. There's a million subtle ways that women have a harder time in the industry. Their films are more harshly judged. One other example is there was a film festival who took all of the names off of this people submitting films, and with no name and no gender associated to the submitted film, I think like over half of the submissions ended up, or half of the accepted films ended up being women, whereas in previous years, like less than a quarter of the accepted films were women. So simply having a female name attached to your film, directed by, written by, whatever, ends up being a strike against you.
We still are not considered equal. And it's just very unfortunate. We do have, I think it is just a cultural thing, and all different countries have their own little taboos about women being involved or having a voice. United States is one of them. A lot of times women just feel that they have a voice and they want to share it, but at times just even people don't even notice how they might just brush you to the side because it's a cultural thing. And so you do have to fight for a stronger voice. I have a lot of female students, and a lot of them are always, how can I make my voice heard more? And I have to tell them, you have to get up and tell them how it is and what your thoughts are. So it is, I think it is difficult. I don't think it is an issue necessarily that they have doubts about the thoughts that they have. It is more that we are softer in the way that we share our thoughts, and we're also better listeners. And we like to study and we like to process information. And I think it takes us maybe a little bit longer time, you know, to reach that conclusion and feel confident that this is the way I feel about things. But we have a long way to go. And the good side of, you know, specifically in film, is that I am seeing a lot of very young women from many different backgrounds that are growing up feeling like I'm more confident than my generation, and that's a very positive thing.
I do think there are still a lot of doors closed for women in media, but I do think a lot of them are being opened now, especially in the last like maybe 5 or 10 years. A lot of those doors have been opened. And I don't think if I was born like 50 years ago that I would be going into film right now. I wouldn't be getting my master's in film. I wouldn't be learning to edit. I wouldn't be learning to be behind the camera 10 years ago. So there definitely are, though, a lot of doors that we do need to break to bust down and get through, I think, in the next few years. But I think it's a lot closer than people think it is. Because I can especially say like 2016 was a huge year for women. 2017 is going to be a better year for women. 2018 is going to be even better, you know? We almost had a woman president. So I definitely think that a lot of the doors we have ripped off the hinges in the last few years, but there's definitely some that we still have to bust through because there still are people that say women can't do it. And I definitely think that that has been proved over the last few years that there are men that still think that, but I also think that there's a lot of women now that are just like, I don't care, I'm gonna do it anyway, which is what I'm doing. Like, I'm just like, I don't care, I'm gonna do it anyway. You tell me no, that's your problem, not mine.
I wouldn't say the doors are closed. The doors are just maybe more sticky. You might have to push them a little harder. You might have to find different doors to go through because that one's just sort of not very convenient. So there's just a little bit more work involved. So I'm not sure that, or there might be some doors are closed, but it's not that you can't find another one. So I think the opportunities are out there. I just think women have to work harder to find them. And I think it's getting better. I think more and more women are finding ways to not only push those doors, but to support other women in sort of opening doors for them, and I think that's a good thing.
I don't think doors are necessarily closed to women. I think it's just they don't understand the opportunity is there. It's hard to say because I don't know everybody, from hiring. I interviewed with 3 men and I got the job. So it doesn't necessarily mean that men are stopping women getting into the field. It's like, I don't know what every scenario is. Why don't women get into the field more? Why aren't they approaching the field? There's a lot that goes into that. And I teach a lot, and sometimes the classes are all men and there's very few women. And that creates a strange dynamic. I've seen it myself. It's very one-sided if you don't have a mix of men and women working together. Hopefully, and you see it, there's a lot more productions where women are running the production and are hiring just women. And that's great because it gives people an understanding of, okay, women can just make a film by themselves. You don't need a man there to support you, which some people are still out there with that mentality. And so that's and that mentality runs Hollywood, unfortunately. But, women just have to prove it for themselves and do it themselves. And it's a battle that continues. I think it's getting a little easier, but it's certainly not the 50s. And it's certainly not how when I started 20 years ago. It's changed. It just hasn't changed as quickly as I would hope.
I think being a female filmmaker is challenging. I think it's a little less challenging now than it used to be, but I still think it's challenging in many ways. But in general, I feel like women are being given maybe a little more often they're being given opportunities to be involved in filmmaking creatively and technically, and being behind the camera, directing and editing and doing cinematography. And that's really important to me, and I really want to support, and I do support as many female filmmakers as I can. Having said that, where I work at Can TV, I am the only female in my department, and I'm the only female in the company doing production. Other women are doing some technical stuff, but maybe like teaching. They're teaching filmmaking or providing other kinds of services to customers. But I have been the only full-time female in my department for at least 10 years. So, and I really pay attention to female filmmakers. When I hear about female filmmakers, no matter what platform they're making, a media maker, a video maker, short, feature, whatever, I really pay attention, and I also kind of seek out that information. So I'm probably more aware of the fact that there are, a good chunk of female filmmakers in the world. However, the general population is probably not as aware of that, and I think that could definitely change, and I hope that it does.
My voice as a woman is important because I have a certain view of things, and I've had certain experiences that some men will never have. Some men do experience, being sexually harassed. I was sexually harassed at work. I've been sexually harassed in the street. A lot of women have that experience, I think that voice needs to be shared because this world is full of women as well. Women want to see stories about them, and we've seen that in the box office recently. Women-centric stories are going to make money, and that's unfortunately part of what studios want. They want a film that makes money. But I think that's been proven. People want their voices on the screen. That goes for race, gender. People want to see it, and people are willing to pay for it. And I think that is finally being shown within the industry, especially for sales. Everybody has a different voice, but we all share the same experiences. So I think, you know, we need to all share our voice so that we understand that we're not the only person on this planet going through whatever at that moment.
I think my voice is important, and I should just say any woman's voice, especially women of color, because there's just so few of us telling stories, and I think the world needs to hear the stories that we want to tell the way we want to tell them. I've certainly seen some great films starring women, written by women, directed by men, that I just think, wow, that guy is like capturing, you know, the essence of this kind of female-led narrative. And like Paul Feig is a great example. He directed Bridesmaids, and he does all of these comedies that I love, and I just think he really knows how to direct and represent women. But he is rare, and so many male writers and directors still write women as the harpy annoying girlfriend, the annoying wife, you know, the bitchy girl, like whatever lame stereotype. And so I think women tend to do a slightly better job making their characters more nuanced.
I think my role as a woman in this industry is really just to stick it to the man kind of thing. Just be like, I can do what I want. Just because I'm a woman, just because I'm a woman doesn't mean I need to be limited by what men think or by what anybody thinks. There are actually still women these days that think women shouldn't be doing this. Like, I know, especially like in the older generation. But it's honestly really, really heartwarming, and really it's a special moment when somebody says, I'm happy to see a woman in this industry. And it has happened to me a couple times. I think I said that earlier before too, where I have had a lady come up to me while I was behind the camera saying, it's great to see a woman doing this. I've had professors, I've had just random people. I had a conversation with somebody in Canada once about, wow, hey, it's really good to see a woman doing this. Actually, you know, trying to be in film, trying to do this, trying to show their voice. And I definitely do show my voice on my YouTube channel a lot, and it's real bad sometimes. But I definitely think that my role as a woman in this industry, though, is to just show that I have a voice, show that I have a point of view, and show that I can do it. It's not, I don't even want to say that I'm trying to prove a point. I just want to say I'm trying to support a point that's already been proven, that women do have a place in any industry they want to be in, not just film. So.
I guess, why is anybody's voice important? I mean, I think we all have different stories to tell. We all bring our own perspectives to them. And I guess women's voices are equally valid as men's voices. And I'd add that African American voices and, you know, people of color are also equally valid. And I think that we'll know that we've sort of hit equal representation of voices when we have, you know, directors that are sort of across the board that just generally represent the diversity of the country, right? You know, if half of the population is women, probably half of the films should be directed by women. And so I think that's how we'll know when, you know, we've really achieved equal access for women.
Here's something really peculiar, I think, in my case. So I grew up in South America. I came here as a foreign student and as a foreign artist. And a lot of times when I was trying to find either funding or find crew or anything like that for projects earlier on, my stories were not Latino enough or women enough, and I don't know what that means. I think it doesn't matter what story you want to tell, because we just have our own voice, and it is the way that we show it and the artist's vision. It doesn't matter what your background is. And so I think the audience tends to jump to the conclusion that because you are from, you know, a certain background or a certain gender, then there's an expectation that that film needs to follow these kind of checklist. And that is just not the case. And we have to be culturally more accepting that if you're an artist, you can say whatever you like.
why is my voice as a woman important when I'm making films? Well, it's only important in that my femaleness is something that's working against the prevailing norms. Maybe it would be nice for us all to live in a society where it doesn't really matter who's making the movie, if they're male or female, if they are African American or Latino or white. But the reality is that there are majority voices and minority voices, so you could say that as a female, my movies may or may not represent a minority voice. Well, I'm certainly interested in making films, and then in the process of doing that, doing my own check in the process to see if I can even detect how the fact that I am female shapes the kind of stories I think are worth telling, or the way I tell them, or the people I choose to tell them about. And so there are certain things like, when I watch TV and movies, it seems to me that, with, of course, many, many important exceptions, that the typical movie will have a dozen male characters and one or two females, and that among the male characters there'll be all sorts of types. They'll be old and young and fat and short and handsome and whatever, and the women will tend to be young and attractive. And so there's certain ways that certain storytelling formulas, when they're coming either from a male sensibility or an expectation of what stories people want to pay money. In other words, are there certain formulas that have been shown to be successful, so are we making movies that fit that formula because people want to make money out of them? So, there again, it's kind of hard to say what's the driver here. But I'm certainly interested in making stories that show that there are a large range of female characters and female perspectives, female experiences, ways women interact with each other and the world, trying to expand that in my own way.
The film industry is still a male-dominated industry, like many. I think women can bring a different perspective that's important to include and to consider. Females are 50% of the population in the world, and we have maybe a slightly different take on things. Maybe we don't, but we should be given the same opportunity as men, and our voice should be heard equally.
Yes, I definitely have felt discrimination because I was a woman. And I'm trying to think of specific examples. You really have to have such a thick skin, and you have to keep plowing ahead and being willing to put yourself out there and face unfair treatment again and again. And I have to tell you that is really not very easy. I don't think I have a thick enough skin for the industry, and there's times I've wanted to give up. But then I read a statistic about how few women there are in film, or I see a movie where the female characters are so insulting to women, and I just think I have to try. I have to keep trying, and even if I don't have any success, the more women who keep trying and who are like, no, I will not sit down, no, I will not go and switch careers, I am here and you have to look at me and you have to deal with me. The more women who do that, we resist, and we push against the system, and we make way for those really successful women who come through and who end up being game changers.
Sure, it happens all the time. I think sometimes in funding against for the reasons that I said before, that they're looking, funders or investors are looking for specific kinds of projects that are going to either make their money back or they are going to fulfill that mission statement if it is for a nonprofit organization. So how to kind of put your stories in one little box, you know, it's very challenging because we're broader. You know, we are biracial, or we are, you know, we have different nationalities. I have multiple nationalities. Does that make me have to pick one box? So that is kind of the way I think a lot of women feel. Like, I want to explore certain things, but that doesn't mean that it's the only voice I have. So I have still today, when you work with certain, you know, individuals that have a long history working on sets that are usually men, and usually white men too, then that makes you the different one. And sometimes you do have to come in a little bit stronger and set up your voice from the beginning so that they learn the respect that you deserve.
I've done like a radio show for campus, film obviously, YouTube, that's all those things I've done. But there definitely is an in general feeling when you're doing that as a woman where there's people looking at you waiting for you to mess up, waiting for them to be able to prove a point that you can't do it. There's no like specific incident where this has happened, but as being in film and being around a lot of men in the industry as well, I definitely had comments from even like male professors in my master's program that have said women don't make it in this industry. Women aren't gonna have as many opportunities as the men are in this class. And that's definitely something that has been discouraging. It hasn't been anything specifically said toward me yet. I'm sure it will come in the future, like when I'm actually more into it, but a lot of the work I'm doing now is with people that trust me and know I know what I'm doing and are like aware that I probably know more than them, which is like, you know, it's a weird way to say that. But I haven't had a specific instance, but there have been instances where I've been told I need to be careful because there are gonna be people who are gonna tell me I can't do it because I am a woman, so.
A sort of culture of sexism that just sort of hangs in the air, you know, particularly in advertising. When I started working in the 90s, there were a lot of my bosses were from the old sort of Mad Men generation of advertising and brought some of those ideas with them. And, you know, I was able to do my work and I was able to do it well, and I feel like I was respected and treated well by them, but there was also just, you know, just the inappropriate jokes or the comments sometimes that were definitely, you know, around and kind of tedious.
I have certainly been discriminated against for being a woman. I was sexually harassed, and that's discrimination because somebody's putting you down for being a woman and thinking they can talk to you and treat you a certain way. I tried to deal with it by going to the company. Their response was, just don't talk to that person. So that was a hard experience because I was pretty young, and it's hard to stand up for yourself. And that's something that you have to do. You have to stand up for yourself and believe that what you are feeling is right and it's wrong for somebody to treat you that way. You know, it's how I was treated was certainly not correct, but people have experienced the same things, unfortunately. And I know a friend who's gone through it recently. You know, it's hard. There were other people going through it at the same place I was working at. There was a woman engineer who was being discriminated. She wasn't getting the shifts that she wanted, and she wasn't getting the pay that she deserved. And that was happening to me as well, but not as extreme as it was with her. You talk to the company. Unfortunately, when it's part of a company, you talk to them, and hopefully they treat you and deal with it in the right way, but sometimes it just doesn't work out the way you want it to. And then, you know, ideally, you just leave that place and go someplace else. Just don't stay in that scenario, you know.
For the most part, I feel like I've been very lucky within the film industry and where I work specifically, even though I am the only female in my department. I feel like the company and my boss has generally been, they're very inclusive. CAN TV has one of the most diverse workforces that I think I've ever seen, especially in maybe filmmaking, and diverse in many ways: men, female, race, ethnicity, age, you know. And I think that that's partly why I've stayed there as long as I have. You know, the work is great too, but having that diversity, I think, really, I think it's just really important, not just for filmmaking, but in society in general, you know. However, you know, I think that sometimes I've had some issues being a female working in media. I think as I've gotten older, maybe it's gotten a little less because I'm older. Maybe they take me more seriously or something. But the other thing is that sometimes I feel like I almost feel like I get more props for the fact that I'm a female working in this industry and that I've been doing it and that I'm as skilled or whatever as I am, you know. And, you know, I think, you know, that some people kind of, some people like my boss and others who work with me, you know, I'm a strong, independent female who has an opinion, and I try to share my opinion when necessary, and be productive with it. And I feel like I definitely, you know, have a voice most of the time, and that what I say is definitely considered. But I know of other people who work in the industry who don't have or haven't had as many positive experiences.
When I went to school, there were a fair amount of women in my program, maybe not quite half, and there were not equal representation among faculty. There was definitely more male faculty. And women I found in film school were a bit more shy. As they got older, and they found their voice, I definitely felt like they really kind of took charge. And of course there was always like a few women who were just really gutsy and so forth, but I found women tended to be a little more shy around camera equipment. I ended up, when I was teaching in the Middle East, all of my students were women, and just by happenstance, you know, men kind of are discouraged from doing the arts, so they're not as interested in film. And because I had so many women, they were emboldened to use equipment. They didn't even think anything of it. You know, they didn't consider, oh, maybe I should let the guy hold the camera because it's too heavy. And I thought that was really wonderful, and it made me reflect on my own experience in school and wish it had been a little more like that. Definitely if a girl was struggling with a camera in film school, if a guy was there, he'd sweep in and be like, oh, I'll take care of that. And I think that sometimes led to a lack of confidence for female students.
Very little. There were very little. I want to say I had also in terms of teachers, there were only probably 2 or 3 female, and no minorities besides female. And then at the same time, in terms of students, there were probably just a handful. A lot of them were doing documentary rather than fiction films. So yes, I was kind of the only one at that time.
Actually going into a class and not knowing it was 90% women was actually a shock when I went there. I even remember making the comment to one of my friends before I started the master's program saying, I'm gonna be in a class that's gonna be all men. Like I'm literally going to be the only girl in this class. It was literally what my brain was thinking until I walked into my classroom that first day and realized 90% of it was women, and I was shocked. I was literally floored. And we even had like a whole conversation in that class about how it was crazy that it was mostly women that were working in this. So a lot of the groups that were in there were just all female groups doing projects. So it was really cool, and like you definitely saw a difference between like the projects the women were doing and the projects the men were doing. One being that the women were a lot more, they had a lot more time management and had a lot more, I don't know, more depth to their projects than the men did. A lot of the men were like, I'm gonna procrastinate, I'm gonna wait to do this, I'm gonna, like, I don't know if that's like a gender thing or if that was just my class. I'm sure that there were some guys in that class that were like very headstrong, knew what they wanted to do, got it, and they made great content, but there was a majority of like the 10% of the guys that were like, I'm just gonna kind of slink through and let the women do it all. There were guys that was actually like that. I didn't have to work with any of them, luckily, that were like, I'm just gonna hand this off to this girl and she's gonna do everything and it's gonna be great because she's doing it. I didn't have to deal with that, but there was actually a lot of men in that class that relied on the women to carry their groups.
When I went to school, there were no women. When I initially took my film courses as an undergrad, there was one film instructor and it was a man. I didn't know, I mean, there was another girl in my class, it was the two of us. I mean, we really bonded, and that's what's great, you know, and that's the great aspect of particularly film schools, you bond with people. And, you know, we became great friends as a result. When I went to grad school, that expanded. There's a lot more women teaching and they're great motivators, and I've worked with them since I've graduated. I've edited their films. So I found myself, and as I realized, because I just applied for a full-time faculty position, I had to do a creative presentation, and I realized every film, like independent work that wasn't, you know, for a company or anything, every film had a female protagonist. So I didn't even realize myself that all my work was based around women. And so I'm very proud of that fact, and I cling to that. But that's, you know, that's also been part of my mission, even though it's been kind of subconscious, is to tell stories from a female perspective, from a woman's perspective. So.
When I went to school, I went to the Art Institute of Chicago for undergrad, and I had a lot of female friends who were not only involved in art, which is a male-dominated industry, but filmmaking, which is a male-dominated industry. And I think, you know, like I said earlier, my peers being female, my female filmmaking peers really inspired me to continue. I think being surrounded by other women who were interested in making media and making moving images and using that to make a statement or tell a story really, you know, gave me a little bit, empowered me a little bit, you know, made me feel a little more comfortable in pursuing that. And so, you know, I think it definitely played a big role.
I would say my two pieces of advice for women who are entering the industry. One is be completely okay and comfortable with a lot of rejection. It's harder for a woman, you're gonna probably face more, but it's part and parcel for the industry. And I think that some of the projects I had that got shot down that I just was so in love with, I look back and I'm like, thank goodness that happened. I either took the time to make them better, or it was never as great of a project as I thought, and I'm glad I didn't spend any more time on it. And it just always led me to the next thing, making my work better, forcing myself to improve, get comfortable with rejection. The best of the best of the best of the best of the best people faced unbelievable amounts of rejection. The only reason they are where they are is because they were like, okay, I just got rejected again, moving on. And the other thing is find a community and consistently support the people in your community. If you are a woman, it would be great if your community is mostly women, but it doesn't really matter. Anyone who's willing to support your work, anyone who needs support, you know, it's not necessarily that easy, but if you can find even 2 or 3 people who you can just boost each other up, help each other out, you know, support each other in any way possible, that will help you get through that rejection. That will help you get through those hard times. That will help you in a pinch when you need someone. And it's quite frankly a lot more fun than doing it alone. So those are my 2 pieces of advice.
Yes, it is a difficult industry. You need to be very persistent and if you found that purpose, if you found that thing that motivates you, that really you think about it all the time, the stories you want to tell or the production, whatever it is that you're interested in, you are going to be rejected a number of times, and you have to learn to get over it and keep pushing forward, because it is not an easy industry, and it is very competitive, and there are so many people that are creating content. So there's a lot, funding is very hard, exhibition is very hard, but if your stories have something important to say that are gonna touch an audience heart, then go for it and be prepared for a fun ride.
I would say that you should, find the collaborators in school that you like working with, whose work you really enjoy and respect, particularly the female collaborators, but not exclusively, and help each other out all the way through your career. Because I think that the most important thing you get from a program, a media program, are the people that you go to school with. The technology is going to change. The technology I learned in undergraduate became obsolete, 10 years after I was out of school. So that will change, and you have to keep that up to date. But the thing that you really get are the people that you're in school with, and that network that, like I said, film is a collaborative business. It is extremely helpful for a director to know a good DP, and a good DP to have relationship with directors and editors and writers and actors, and all of those people come together to make these projects. So you need that network, particularly when you're young, to make your first projects happen. And so, the other thing I would say is just make work. Keep making work over and over again. The best way to learn is by doing, and to, however, whenever, wherever, to just do every project you can, and after you're done, evaluate it. What did you learn from it? What can you do better? And then go do another one. I don't think there's one. For most people, at least, there's not like one big break. There's not one big project. So you shouldn't put all of your eggs in any one project's basket.
When you're looking to graduate, I would certainly try to find somebody who's in the field that can be a mentor. I never had that, and I wish I did. Particularly a woman who's kind of gone down the road, and if you ever come up with something that you feel like you're being harassed, you have somebody you can speak to and talk to and kind of get some feedback from with that, just from a personal level. And then from, looking at your work, it certainly helps when people have connections and you can kind of work through them for their connections, because it can be really insular sometimes. If you don't have the connections, sometimes it's hard to get the work. Because, post on, Craigslist, hey, we're hiring, a whole new post-production crew or what have you. It's really through word of mouth a lot of the time. So having that base connection that you can work from, along with the connection that you already have from school, you keep those connections and you keep those relationships, because those are important down the road. And then from that, you have to work, and sometimes it's not for a lot of money, but you have to work it. You have to build that reel, build that experience, so that you get into a position where you can offer what you have. If you don't work and don't do it, it's hard to kind of, boost what you've already done and kind of explain, this is all I've done, this is what I can show you. And beyond that, you have to think about what your end goal is. What do you really want to do? If you want to work in film and television, unfortunately Chicago is not the place to stay. You can certainly start your own kind of productions and do kind of a web series and kind of build up that. And a lot of things have happened where people have gotten deals with Netflix from a web series or HBO, but that can be difficult because people still look at the coasts for inspiration, unless they're doing, King Kong for the 20th time. Think about what you want to do. Think about what your passion is and try to work towards getting to that as best as you can.
You know, my advice to anybody, female or anything, would be some advice that came to me. It was just, do you want to learn how to make movies? Well, just make movies. And that is just do it. Do not be deterred. Make product, make mistakes, do things. Follow your own voice. Do not try to, I think this is important for me anyway. Don't think, how can I change my vision so that it'll fit into some niche, and but instead find what is distinctive and unique about your sensibility, your voice, and really cultivate it and make it as like extremely individual as possible. And let's see, what else? Yeah, just do it again and again and again. Be prepared to have a lot of mistakes and failures and just keep going. But I mean, gosh, it's just such a wonderful thing. And I think also a huge realization for me has been that if I scale my project down until it's so small that I can really give a lot of attention to making this project as good as I'm capable of, given my resources and experience at this point, then that's the way to go. So instead of thinking, how can I make an hour-and-a-half feature film that involves a car chase and a scene on a beach in Hawaii, because that's the storyline I have in my head. How can I create a storyline that works within the really tight constraints that I have, like amateur actors and locations that I have access, that I can use without inconveniencing someone else or being kicked out or having a lot of background distraction. You know, so a lot of what I do right now is structured around what is achievable, and then how can I take what is achievable and turn that reality-based production idea into something that's as beautiful as possible for me right now. And like breathing life into a very small concept and making it huge is something that I just love.
For any female that's interested in pursuing media, first and foremost, do not be scared of learning technical skills. You know, there's a lot that goes into filmmaking and media making. You have to know cameras, you have to know microphones, you have to know computers, and more, you know? But, and that can be intimidating, I think, to some people. All the technology that you have to know, or know people that know. It's actually not as difficult, I think, as maybe people think it is. I don't know. So I think that, you know, for any female nowadays pursuing any career, if you want to do that, whatever it is, filmmaking or not, I encourage all women, all young women, to pursue it if that's what their passion is. Because I think that living, you know, if you have the opportunity to pursue something that you're passionate about, I think you should do it. Not everybody has that opportunity, and if you are privileged enough to have the opportunity to pursue it in some form or fashion, I say go for it. Like, don't let fear hold you back, because it's not going to help you in any way, you know? And get to know people and ask around and make connections and, you know, apply for jobs that you don't even think you're qualified for, because my guess is most men are doing it, you know? So like, just try everything.
My advice to any young women trying to get into the film industry or any kind of media industry is to just do it. Don't let anything hold you back, because if you learn it and you do it well, you're going to succeed in it no matter what anybody tells you, no matter what anybody does. Definitely educate yourself. Learn to use every single kind of program you can. So don't just limit yourself to one editing program. Learn like 4, learn 5, learn 6. I don't know if there's that many editing programs, but there probably are. So learn them all. don't just, specialize in one section. Don't just do editing, don't just do directing, don't just do screenwriting. Do it all. Dabble a little bit in all of it. Figure out how to do all of it. Because the more stuff you're skilled in, the more you have to put on your resume, the better it's gonna be. So don't just focus on one thing in film, focus on everything and just do it. I'm gonna be like the Nike commercial, just do it. Don't let anything hold you back because you got this, no matter what.